Stanford University.
Okay, well, this is lecture 6 of Stanford CS 193P, spring of 2016. And today we're going to dive in more to this topic of multiple MVCs. If you remember last lecture, I talked a little bit about multiple MVCs and how we can combine them with tab bars, split view controllers, and navigation controllers. And we showed a little bit how to wire them up. Well, today I'm going to talk about how we transition between them. Right? We can, it's one thing to wire them up in our storyboard, but as the user navigates our user interface, clicks on buttons and stuff, we want to navigate between these MVCs, okay? And then, time permitting at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this view controller lifecycle, the thing that I always delete, okay, those two methods. There's a few more methods in the view controller lifecycle that I'm going to talk about. And again, time permitting, I'll do a quick little demo at the end, all right? So, segues, okay, we've wired up these controllers of controllers, like tab bar, split views, navigation controllers, and we've got all of our nice MVCs, and now we want to transition between them. We call those transitions segues, right? The word segue in English means a transition. And there's really 4 major kinds of segues. I'm going to talk about some more rare segues towards the end of the quarter, but the main segues that you're going to wire up in a storyboard, one is called a show segue. So remember the navigation controller that's the stack of cards, right? Like the settings app I showed you, where you're putting more stacks on the card. Well, transitioning to put a new card on the stack, okay, is done using a show, what we call a show segue, because it shows another MVP, or MVC. I'm thinking about Steph Curry, I guess, okay? MVC. And then show detail is if you have a split view, okay, and something happens in the master and you want to show an MVC, a different MVC, in the detail, okay? Show detail, that's the detail of a split view. Show detail also works in a navigation controller, okay? So if you do show detail, it's really the same as show in a navigation controller, unless that navigation controller is inside of a split view, okay? Show and show detail would be the same, but if a navigation controller is inside a split view, then show means show it in the navigation controller, and show detail means show it in the split view controller, right? Show the detail. Then there's modal and popover. I'm not going to talk about those today. Modal is basically segueing to take over the entire screen with another MVC, okay? And a popover is almost exactly the same, except for instead of taking over the entire screen, it still takes over the entire screen in terms of input, but it draws it in a little popover window, and everything else is kind of grayed out, and you can click on the grayed out part to dismiss the popover. Okay, so those are the major kind of segues that you wire up in your storyboard. So we're going to talk about navigation controllers, split view controllers, tab bar today. So for navigation and split view controllers, we're talking about show and show detail. Okay, so we're going to talk about today. All right, it's very important to understand that segues virtually always create a new MVC. Okay, if you segue to an MVC, it's going to create it. You rarely, extremely rare, there's only one kind of segue where you're going to segue to an MVC that already exists. Okay, so segues create new MVCs. Okay, super important to understand. That's even true in a split view. If you do a show detailed segue, it replaces the MVC that's in the detail side. That's why we sometimes call a show detail a replace segue. Okay, that's kind of its old name. All right. So how do we make these segues happen? Okay, it's just like we always do, we control drag. Okay, just like we control drag to wire up our MVCs to our split view control navigation controller, we're also going to control drag to determine how they segue to each other, okay, how they transition. It's also possible to make segues happen in code. There's a method you can call that says do this segue, perform segue it's called. Okay, so here is something wired up as of our last lecture here. I've got a split view controller, and the detail is this little graphing thing at the bottom. And the master is a navigation controller with your little calculator view controller right there. Okay, that calculator view controller up there, looking at this side today, that calculator up there might be exactly the same MVC as the one you're building in your homework. Okay? All right, so if we want to add a button to the calculator that caused this graph to show, maybe graph what's in your calculator, wouldn't that be cool? Then we would control drag from that little button. You can hardly see that button, but it's there. Control drag to the MVC we want to segue to. Okay, so that's the way it works. You just control drag to. Now when you control drag to, it's going to put up a little black window here, which I'll zoom in on, which is going to ask you what kind of segue do you want. Do you want a show detail, a modal, or a popover? Okay? So if you want this to appear as the detail in a split view, you're going to pick Show Detail. If otherwise it's just in a navigation controller, you're going to pick Show. Okay? Again, we'll talk about the other two later in the quarter. All right, so you've got that wired up. As soon as you do that, you get this little guy appearing here, this line with a little thing in the middle here. This is the segue. Okay? And this segue, just like a button or anything else, is inspectable. So if you go over here to the inspector and inspect it, it's going to let you set some things about the segue. The most important thing is its identifier. Okay, every segue needs an identifier because in your code, you're going to have to refer to that segue, and you do it by name, by this identifier. That's how you're going to refer to this in your code. So it's critical that you give your segues names, okay, this identifier thing. We'll see that in the demo. And the name of the identifier should probably describe what the segue does. It's usually a verb, like a verb phrase like show graph. Do something, because that's what segues do. They do something. So it's usually some kind of verb phrase. Okay, so so where in our code are we going to use that identifier for the segue? There's really two places. One place that we don't use too much is when we want to make that segue happen from code. And we can do that with this method in UI View Controller. Okay, UI View Controller, you all know what that is. Okay. It's called perform segue with identifier. You give it the identifier, and then you can pass any object you want as the sender. Okay, the sender is the object that is causing this segue to happen. Often that's a button, okay, but when you're doing it from code, you can send any object really that you want. Okay, and you'll see why we need that in a moment. Okay, so that's one reason you need the identifier. But a much more important reason is because when a segue happens, the MVC you're segueing to usually needs to be prepared to come on screen. Okay? It needs some information. Maybe it needs its model to be set. That's a common thing. Maybe it needs some of its drawing attributes to be set. Okay? So that is happening in this preparation. So this is so important. I'm going to talk about the preparation in detail. Now, the preparation happens with a method that is sent to the view controller that is causing the segue to happen. Not the view controller on the other end that's being created, but the one that is causing it to happen, okay? That view controller is going to be sent this message, prepare for segue, okay? And its job in this method is to prepare the MVC that's being created by the segue to do what it wants to do. Now, it's really important to understand with this multi-MVC world that it's object-oriented in that each MVC kind of has its own world. Okay? They don't really want to be talking back to each other. And the MVC on the under end of a segue is really part of the view of the MVC that's causing the segue. Remember those graphics that I told you? So it really can't talk back to the one causing the segue. It would have to use some kind of blind structured communication because the view is not really allowed to talk to its controller except for in these structured ways, right? The controller can talk to the view, no problem. And it's going to here. This is going to be the controller talking to its view by preparing that MVC. But you really want to think of MVCs as living in their own world, self-contained. They have some public API. You set things in their public API, and they do what they do, okay? It's very tempting when you're writing code, especially maybe a lot of the code that you've written so far in classes, to think, oh, well, I can just put a method here and a method there, and they can all call each other, and it's all fine. But it's not. You need to start thinking in terms of programming interfaces, okay, encapsulation, true object-oriented programming here. Okay? I made you think about that a little bit in your assignment with calculator brain and the calculator view controller, right? The calculator brain has a public API. It's very clear what the public methods are. Those are the only methods the controller can use. Okay? Hopefully you didn't write your assignment where they're each calling private methods in each other or things like that. Okay? There's got to be well defined what those objects encapsulate. Okay? That's object-oriented programming. So same thing here, but at the whole MVC level, right? We want the MVCs to be well defined in what they do. All right, so let's talk about prepare for segue here and what it does, how you make it work, what all the parts of it are, okay? So first of all, you have the arguments here for prepare for segue. The first argument is the segue. So this is an instance of a class called UI Storyboard Segue, and it contains interesting information about the segue, most notably the identifier, okay, that identifier we typed in the inspector, and also the controller of the MVC that you're segueing to. It just created it, and you can because remember, Segues always created an MVC. So it just created that thing, and you can get a pointer to it from this segue argument right here. One of the properties on UI Storyboard Segue is the destination view controller. Okay, this other argument here, sender, it's the same sender as was in perform segue with identifier. This is just who caused this segue to happen. Usually it's a button, okay, but it could be any object if it started in code with perform segue with identifier, okay? So we'll see this in the demo, sometimes why you would want to know who this is, okay? All right, so here's the identifier. I'm getting it with the var here called identifier, right, the property off of this segue thing. I'm checking here to make sure it's not nil, because someone might have created a segue in the storyboard and they forgot to set the identifier, or they didn't set the identifier. So it could be nil. So I'm checking to make sure it's not nil here. And then I'm switching on it. Okay? So I'm going to switch on it, and in this case, I'm going to look for show graph, which is in my previous slide. That's what I called, that's what the identifier for that thing was. And when I see that this is a show graph segue, then I'm going to try and prepare the destination of the segue, assuming that it is some sort of graph controller, right? Some controller of an MVC that shows a graph. So I'm going to have to prepare it, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the destination view controller of this segue, where we're segueing to, okay? And I'm going to see if it's a graph controller. And it better be, because that's the only way I know how to prepare for a segue called show graph. So this thing better be, but I am doing if let with as to see if it is, because destination view controller, its type is just UI view controller. Okay? So I need to cast it with as, just like I cast in any object sometimes with as. Here I'm going to cast this view controller, if I can, to be a specific kind of controller that I'm expecting this segue to be segueing to. Okay? So in this case, some sort of graph controller of some sort. All right? Now, once I've done that, now VC right here is going to be of type graph controller. Okay, that's what if let this as that does, right? Inside this curly brace, VC is going to be of type graph controller. And so I can start sending messages and setting properties, public ones only, of this controller in order to prepare it to do its job. So if it's a graph controller, I don't know, it might want to know the axis, the range of the axes. Somehow it might want to know what function it's graphing. I don't know, okay? But that is happening in here, where I'm preparing this graph controller that just got created because of a segue to do what it does. Okay? Questions about that? All right. So it's really important to understand, and that's why it's in red here. I don't put things in red very often, but it's in red, that when you're doing this prepare of that destination view controller, it was only just created just now, okay, femtoseconds ago, okay? So its outlets have not been set, okay? This happens before its outlets are set. This is quite annoying, okay? Because usually when you want to prepare a view controller, you want to set things up in its outlets, like a calculator one, you'd want to set something in the display or something like that. But you can't do that, okay? Unfortunately, you can't do that. This is happening before your outlets are set. So you have to just give it the data it wants, and it's going to have to hold on to that data, and then after its outlets are set, it can start parceling that out to its UI, okay? You will, at least once this quarter, get a crash, because you'll start preparing some view controller, you'll start accessing its outlets, those outlets are still nil, and you're going to get optional nil was accessed, okay? I'm going to do it in my demo just to show you it happening, because it can happen so much. All right? Okay, so that's preparing, super important part of segues, okay, so preparing. Now, there's a method you can also implement in your view controller in addition to prepare for segue called should perform segue with identifier. Okay? And that is basically going to return a bool whether or not that segue should happen. So you can prevent it. For example, let's say in your calculator, let's say you had a button that did a graph, and let's say it was a partial result, so you couldn't really graph it. This might return false. Okay? And maybe you'll see that on your homework. All right, so the demo I'm going to do is I'm going to take FaceIt that we have so far that draws that face. I'm going to add a second MVC. Okay, and this MVC is going to have some emotions listed in it, and when you click on them, it's going to show a face that reflects that emotion. Okay, so I'm going to have two MVCs, and we're going to hook them up. Okay, so here we are back in FaceIt, exactly where we were. I haven't added anything or changed anything, right? So we've got our face view controller right here. It's got its model, which is a facial expression, and then it's got its view, which is this face view thing right here. We add some gestures. We update our UI when this thing is first set. Our update UI just takes the model, all these things out of the model, okay, and turns them into things in the view. And then these are just the handlers for these gestures, and that's it. So that's all we have in our controller. And our storyboard is really, really simple. It only has this one view controller, okay, this face view controller. And what I'm going to do right off the bat is add another MVC. So how do you add another MVC to your storyboard? Well, you go over here to your object palette, and just like from your object palette, you can do things like adding buttons and labels. You can also add entirely new MVCs. And the way you do that is by grabbing this thing called View Controller at the top and dragging it out into your storyboard. Okay? So I'm going to put it right there. You can move things around wherever you want. Okay? So now I have two MVCs in here. One really interesting thing to note is that a MVC always needs to have a custom class. Okay? If it doesn't have a custom class, then where are you going to put your outlets and actions and all that stuff? So just like this view controller, if you look at its identity inspector, remember we changed this identity in the identity inspector to be face view controller, okay? So that makes it so that this class is the controller for that thing. So it has a model and outlets and things like that. Okay, we need to do the exact same thing with this view controller. It needs to have a custom class. So the way you create classes, you'll remember, just like we did when we created face view, for example, is we do new file here. Okay, so I'm going to do new file. It's going to be an iOS source. It's going to be a Cocoa Touch class because it's going to be a subclass of UI view controller, just like face view controller was. So I'm going to double click here. Here, subclass of, this is good, okay? Remember we did UI view before, now we want UI view controller as our class. We don't want to call it view controller, that's a very generic name, so I'm going to call it emotions view controller, because that's what it shows. This view controller shows emotions. Okay? Put it in the same place we always put it, right here, same as all our other code. And here we go. Here's our emotions view controller. Again, I'm going to remove these view controller lifecycle methods for now. But notice also when I created this, I got this little method. What is this method? It's prepare for segue. Okay, segues are so important to having multiple view controllers that when it gives you a blank one, it always gives you prepare for segue. Comment it out, but it knows you're almost certainly going to want to prepare for segue. Okay, that's how important this is. And indeed, we are going to have to implement this if we want clicking on emotions to go to our other MVC and do things, okay? But we're not going to do this right now. The next thing we're going to do, and you'll forget this step, okay? You will for sure forget this step multiple times, which is we have to remember to go here and set in the identity inspector the class of this thing to be that emotions view controller. A lot of times you'll create that emotion view controller and you just dive right in, you start programming and you forget to do this, and then you can't connect any of your outlets and you're like, what's wrong with this thing? Okay, well this is why. You forgot to set your identity here, okay? So now I have two. You see this one says emotions view controller and this one says face view controller, so two MVCs. Notice this little arrow right here. You see this arrow? This arrow tells the app when it runs, start with this view controller. So if I were to run right now, it would show the face. But if I wanted to show my new view controller first, I can just pick this arrow up and drop it on this one. Okay? So let's go ahead and run actually to verify that. We should get a nice blank screen. Okay, here it is. Nice blank screen, working perfectly. Now, one thing to notice also is it got a warning here. Look, see this warning? Scene is unreachable due to lack of entry points. It's talking about this scene, okay? By the way, we call these MVCs in the storyboard, this is called a scene, okay, a scene. So this scene is unreachable because this arrow doesn't point to it and nothing in here segues to it. So you can't get to it, okay? Which makes sense, so it's good that it's warning us about that. All right, let me build the UI of this guy right here, okay? As I said, it's just going to have some emotions in here that you can click on. Normally, you'd probably want to do this with a table view, okay? A table, an extensible list of them, but I'm not teaching a table view till next week, so we're going to use buttons. All right, so I'm just going to drag out 4 buttons here to be my the 4 emotions that I'm going to have here. Sorry, this in here. And when I drag it out, it doesn't really matter where I put it because I'm going to stack view them, okay? So let's go ahead and make the font a little bigger here. Go 40 point. And so what buttons do we want to have here? How about an angry button? And we'll have 3 other buttons. How about happy? And how about worried? Is that an emotion? Worried? I don't know. It's good to make a face of it, though. How about mischievous? Mischievous? Is that how you spell that? Again, I'm not sure that's an emotion, but it makes a good face. Okay, so here I have my things. I'm going to stack view these. Just going to select them all and go embed in stack view. I don't want them left aligned like this, so I'm going to change their alignment to fill the space. I'll do fill equally, although they're all the same font, so they're all going to be the same height anyway, so it doesn't really matter there. So I want these words to always be in the middle of my screen, even if I'm rotated, like if I'm in landscape or portrait, I will always want them in the middle. So I'm going to use the dashed blue lines to put it right in the middle, and then I'm going to do the same trick we did before, which was reset to suggested constraints. And it's going to use those blue lines to suggest some constraints to constrain this stack view on here. And let's go look what it suggested. Remember to do that, we go over here to the size inspector. We go down to where it says constraints. And sure enough, align the center on the x-axis to super view and align the center on the y-axis super view. Perfect, exactly what I want. So now if I run, it's going to center this horizontally and vertically. Okay, even if I'm in landscape. Okay, so now I've built this UI. It's great, it's exactly what I want. And I now have 2 MVCs. Now I'm going to show you all 3 ways of combining MVCs: tab bars, split view controllers, and navigation controllers. Let's start with tab bar controller. Okay, how would I put these 2 things, one in each in its own tab? Well, I'm going to go down here, okay, to our object palette. And if you look, about 6 or 7 down, there's this tab bar controller. You see that? And if I drag this out here, okay, it'll put this tab bar out here. It unfortunately also brings some extra MVCs here, these little blank MVCs that I don't want. So I'm just going to click on those and delete them. So get rid of that one and get rid of that one. So all I have now is my tab bar controller. If you can read that, I'll zoom in a little. Okay, see, tab bar controller, and then I've got my 2 MVCs here that I created, my motions view controller and my face view controller. Now, I for sure want the app to start with the tab bar controller, so I'm going to move that arrow. This is another thing you'll forget. You'll forget to move this arrow, okay? And now I just want this to be in one tab and this in the other. I just do that with control drag. So control drag to this one. I'm going to hook up this view controllers. Remember, the view controllers property in a tab bar is just an array of all the tabs, okay, the MVCs that are in the tabs. And I'll do this one also, hook that in the view controllers array. Okay, you can even see it's already starting to put the tabs on the bottom. If you wanted to edit what's in these tabs, like the names, you'd think, oh, you double click down here or something, but no, because this is the tab bar controller, and these titles and images are all set by the MVCs inside, okay, in an object-oriented way, right? So if you wanted to set this, you would actually go to each one of them, and you can even double click right here and put in whatever you want. You can also click here and inspect them, okay, if you go to the inspector. You can set images. There's also a bunch of system ones, okay? So that's how you set that. So this is what our storyboard looks like right now. And if we run this, we'll see that we get a tab bar. You see it's got 2 tabs at the bottom here. And if I click between them, I get my 2 MVCs. Now, this is completely inappropriate to what I'm building here, because I would never want, if I clicked on one of these, for it to switch over to this tab. Okay? That's because when you do a tab bar UI, listen closely, the user owns which tab is showing. Okay? They get to choose by clicking on those tabs. You don't get to choose by throwing them over to one. Okay? That is not appropriate for tab bar. Everyone got that? So things in a tab bar UI tend to be independent things that don't segue from one to another. You can't even make a segue from one tab to another. So no such segue, okay? So we don't want to do a tab bar controller here, so I'm just going to delete my tab bar controller. Okay? Now, one thing you'll notice when I deleted my tab bar controller is, where's my arrow? Okay? It's gone. So now it's not going to, if I run, I'm actually going to get an error in the console saying, I don't know where to start in my storyboard, basically. So how do you get that arrow back? Just click the one you want the arrow to be on, inspect it, and go right down here, very top is initial view controller. If you turn that on, the arrow will come back there. Okay, and you can move it, okay, down to here if you want. Okay? All right, so let's talk about split view controller. We haven't even done anything with iPad at all in this class yet, so this is our first time doing it. And we're going to put this in split view controller where this is the master and this is the detail. Makes sense, right? Because if we're clicking in the master, this would be the detail that's shown from clicking on this. So how do we do a split view controller? Same way as tab bar. I'm going to go down here. Right below tab bar is split view controller. I'm going to drag that out. I get a whole bunch of junk with it. We'll zoom out so you can see it. Okay? See, I got all these extra things. So I'm going to click on these extra things and delete them. Don't want any of them. Okay? So I just have the split view controller and my two guys here. Of course, I want the split view controller, again, to be the start. So I'm going to put the arrow there. And then, in order to hook up master and detail, control drag, master, control drag, detail. Okay? So that's how we set it up. Couldn't be simpler. So let's run, but let's run on iPad. So I'm going to, an iPad 2 here. We'll run. And hopefully this will show up as master, and this will be the detail. All right, so here's the iPad. Here's the detail. You notice that when it's in portrait, it fills the screen with the detail, and you get the master by dragging out from the side. See that? Okay, that's how you get the master. And if you're in landscape, then they're both on screen at the same time. Now, if I click on these, I want this face to show me angry, show me happy, show me worried, show me mischievous. Okay, so how do I do that? This is where the segues come in. Okay, this is where we have to have this view controller segue to create a new one of these. And when it creates this, it's going to create it with the proper facial expression. Okay, so it's going to prepare it with the facial expression and show it. Okay, so let's do those segues. The way we do segues, also control drag. So let me zoom in here so you can see this. All right, I'm going to control drag from whichever of these buttons I want to segue from. I'm going to segue from all four, so I'm going to have 4 segues. So like angry here, I'm just going to control drag down to this MVC and let go. And it says, well, what kind of segue do you want? Show, show detail, modally, or pop over. Well, we're in the split view controller here, so I want to show detail, right? Split view, master detail, show detail. Bam. There it is right there. Okay? Created this little thing here. That's my segue. And this segue can be inspected, as you can see it up here. Okay, this is the attributes inspector. And it's got the kind, show detail, okay, also known as a replace segue. It's animates. It shows that this segue is going to happen in an animated fashion. Something's going to slide in or whatever. It's not always makes sense to animate, but sometimes it does. Class and module, don't worry about that. That's for creating your own custom segues, which we're not going to talk about in this class, a little bit too advanced. And then here is the all-important identifier. So here we have to give any string we want that identifies this segue. So I could call this, for example, the angry segue. Maybe I'd want a verb phrase like show anger or something like that. But it's fine also maybe to have a nice simple word like angry. So that's my angry segue right there. Okay? And so now let's wire up the other ones. Control drag this one down here. This one is also going to be show detail. They're all going to be show detail. Do worried also. Show detail. Oops, not present modally. Get rid of that. Worried. Down here. Show detail. Mischievous. Show detail. Okay, now I need to set the identifier for all of these. What's really cool is if I click on one, it'll tell me who the sender of this segue is. So there's worried. Okay, worried. Here is happy. Okay, we'll call this my happy segue. This one, angry, already set up. This one, mischievous. Okay, mischievous. Hopefully I spell that right. Okay, so now we've got these segues set up. So let's run, see what happens here. All right, angry, happy, nothing is happening. What is the problem here? Okay, well, it is actually segueing here. It's replacing that face with a new MVC, but that new face has not been prepared to show the emotion we want. So it's just showing the default emotion, whatever happened to be in our storyboard, right? This face right here just happens to be, or it's actually what happens to be the default our model is that. Okay, so we need to, in all these segues, prepare the MVC that we're segueing to. We do that in the source view controller. That's the emotions view controller. This is the thing that implements prepare for segue. So I'm just going to uncomment out the comments here, okay, for my prepare for segue. Make lots of space. All right, so here we have prepare for segue. We get the two arguments, the segue, which tells us a little bit about which segue it is and what the destination view controller is. And then we have the sender. That's going to be those buttons, like the angry button, the mischievous button. That's what this is going to be. It's going to be UI button. Okay? This is any object because it's allowed to be any object. In this case, it's a button, but it's allowed to be any object. All right, so what do we do here in preparing for segue? The first thing I'm going to do is get a hold of the destination view controller and make sure that it's a face view controller. Because if it's not, I don't really know how to prepare for the segue, so I'm just going to do nothing in that case. So I'm going to create a little local variable. Okay? I'm going to call it destination VC, destination view controller. And that's just equal to the segue, destination view controller. Okay? Now, this is a UI view controller, okay, of some sort. It's some subclass of UI view controller. I suppose it could even be UI view controller itself, but it's probably a subclass of it. And so I need to get that subclass. I'm going to need to get this variable in some way so that it's a subclass of it, or I can't work with it. Right? Because UI view controller, I wouldn't be able to send any of the face view controller messages to it because it's just a generic UI view controller. So I need to get myself a face view controller. So I'm going to say if I can let face VC, which is a new variable, equal the destination VC as a face view controller, then I'm ready to rock here. Okay? Now I have a face view controller. Okay, so I've just casted there. Similar to how I can't work with any object, I really can't work with a generic UI view controller. I need the subclass. Otherwise, how am I going to set its model? Okay, I have to be able to talk to it. All right, so now I have this destination view controller. Now I need the identifier. So here I'm going to say if I can let the identifier equal the segues identifier. Okay, so here I'm just checking to make sure it's not nil. Now, it should be angry or mischievous or happy, one of those identifiers that I put in the storyboard, right? And I could do something here like switch on the identifier, and if it's angry, then I'm going to have my face VC's expression be a facial expression that's angry, blah, blah, blah. I could do that, but that's going to be a lot of if-then, blah, blah, okay, mess. So instead, I'm going to do one of my favorite ways to program, as you're probably getting the idea about, which is use a dictionary. Okay, so I have this dictionary. I'm going to type in real fast. Okay, and this dictionary has keys, which are the identifiers, and it has values, which are the appropriate facial expression. Okay, got that? So instead of doing all this switching on the identifier thing, I'm just going to say if I can let the expression that I want equal these emotional faces up here, that's this dictionary up here, indexed by the identifier. Okay, then I know the expression that I want, and now I can prepare my face VC, okay, by setting its expression equal to this expression. Okay, and remember, face VC.expression, that is just face view controller's model, which is a public var. This view controller allows its model to be set externally, publicly. Okay, which makes sense, given this kind of model. Not all, and doesn't make sense always for every MVC to allow its model to be set, but often it makes some sense. All right, so now I've prepared this face view controller to do what it needs to do. Everybody got that? Okay, so now let's run and see if it's working. Okay, so here we go. We have our iPad here. Let's try angry. Uh-oh, crasharoo. Wonder why that crashed. Well, let's look and use the debugger. Okay, we haven't used the debugger much in these demos, but let's do it here. Seems like, okay, whenever I have a crash, I always look first in the console. Okay, because the console is always going to tell me something about what happened. And here it says, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. Okay, well, this is probably the #1 crasher you're ever going to get. It's one of the few ways actually to crash Swift code is to have an unwrapping a nil. So it's happening on this orange line of code. I'm looking here. Does anyone see an optional here? No? Nobody sees an optional on this line of code? It doesn't look like it, does it? Because you don't see any exclamation points. I'm not unwrapping anything. What's going on? Well, actually, what is face view? What's its type? Anyone remember? Our outlet, that's our outlet, remember here? Right? It's a optional face view. Okay? It's implicitly unwrapped, okay, but it's still an optional. And I told you in the slides that your outlets are not set at the time you're preparing. So this face view right here, okay, is nil. Let's look. Okay, here's where our variables are down here. Clicking on self, face view, sure enough, nil. So my pointer to my face view has not been set yet by iOS, and that's always going to be the case when you're preparing. So be prepared for that happening, okay? So what can we do about it here? Okay, well, one thing we could say, if face view does not equal nil, then we'll do all this updating UI stuff, right? Okay, by the way, why is this happening? Why are we on this line of code? If we look over here on the left, it'll show us how we got here, okay? So we're in this place right here, okay? So let's see how we got here by clicking here. Oh, see, we set our model, which makes sense, and it called update UI. Why are we setting our model? Okay, let's go up more. Up, sure enough, here we are preparing. Okay, setting our model. So this is right. Preparing for Segue, goes in here, sets our model, wants to update the UI. It's great. Unfortunately, our view has not been connected via outlet. All right? So this is one way we could do it. By the way, there's another trickier way to do it, which is to use question mark here. You know that question mark works for optional chaining, right, on the right-hand side of an equals. It also works on the left-hand side. If you put a question mark there, you can put as many of those question marks as you want on the left side of an equals. And if any of the things that you put a question mark are nil, it just ignores the whole statement. Like it didn't even happen. Okay? So that would be another way. But we'd have to put a question mark on every single axis of face view in here. So we might as well just check to see if it's not nil. Now, is this going to fix our problem? And the answer is, yes, it is. Because we do update UI when our model gets set. But we also do update UI when this outlet gets set. Remember? So when the outlet later, after the prepare is done, when the outlet comes along and gets set, boom, our UI will get updated with the model that we set during prepare. Okay, so it's going to work fine. Okay, but this is part of the reason why when our outlets get set, we update our UI, and when our model gets set, we update our UI, because the order of them happening can be, can vary. All right. Sound good? All right, so we fixed that. We checked this, so it's not going to crash anymore. So let's run. And hopefully this is all working like a charm now. All right, here we go. Ready? Angry, happy, worried, mischievous. Okay? All right, so this is working great. Okay, and let's try it this way. Slide out, angry, happy, right? Working like a charm. Okay? All right, now, what about iPhone? Okay, this is great on iPad. Let's try running this on iPhone and see what we get. All right, here's our thing. We got it here. Let's try happy. All right, we're happy. Actually, now we're not so happy because we're stuck. Okay, there's no way for me to get back to choosing something else. Okay, I could try rotating. No, I don't. I could try sliding out from the left. Nope, nope. Okay, split view does not split on an iPhone. Only on the iPhone 6 Plus, which is the only one big enough to really do it. Okay, so we're stuck here. So this UI that we have in our storyboard is no good for iPhone. Okay, now we can still make our guy blink. Okay, but that's all we can do. So unless we're happy just watching him blink all day, we need to fix this. So how are we going to make this work on iPhone? Okay, first we got to ask ourselves, what would be an appropriate UI on iPhone? Okay, and this is where navigation controller comes in. Navigation controller would be great here because you start the stack of cards with the angry, mischievous, worried MVC, and then when you click the face, it puts a new card on top, which is the face, and then if you want a different one, you just hit back, throw that card away, and you're back to the angry, mischievous, worried choice again, right? So it's perfect, okay? Navigation controller would be a perfect UI. So we need to put a navigation controller into our storyboard, okay? So let's do that. Let's go back to our storyboard over here. There's lots of space here. So where am I going to put this navigation controller? Well, you really only need one navigation controller around the root view controller, the base card, the cards at the bottom. Okay? So I can put a navigation controller here in the same way I put these other things by going down here. You can see there's a navigation controller right here. I could drag it out, I could control drag, etc. But there's actually a cooler way to do it, which is select your root MVC, which is this guy. That's the card that's at the bottom of the stack. And go up to Editor, and just like you did embed in stack view, do embed in navigation controller. You can also do it for tab bars, by the way. But do a navigation controller. Now watch what happens here. Boom. It put this inside a navigation controller, automatically wired it up. Now what's kind of interesting about this is it also made that navigation controller be the master of the split view. In other words, it kind of wrapped the navigation controller around the root view controller and kept that pointer to the master. So now the master is actually a navigation controller with this as its root view controller. Still, all these segues are still here. Okay, these segues are still, it didn't undo any of these segues. And this is still the detail of the split view controller.
How did you put it in the navigation?
How did I put it in there? I selected this, which was my root view controller, and I went to Editor, Embed in, Navigation Controller. Okay? So now this is an interesting setup right here. Let's see if it just fixed it. Maybe it'll just work because I've got this in a navigation controller right now, so it should just work on iPhone, right? Let's try it. How many people think this is going to work? Raise your hand if you think it's going to work. Nobody thinks it's going to work. It is going to work. Gotcha. Okay, so here I am in my navigation controller. I'm going to go back. Here's my stuff. Let's try worried. He looks worried. I'm not worried, though, because I know it's going to work. Okay, so this worked fine. Exactly what we want on iPhone. Now my question to you is this still going to work on iPad? Okay, let's go look at that. Let's go back to iPad. How many people think it's going to work on iPad still? 1, 2, 3. Oh, you guys are getting smart. Yes, it's still going to work on iPad. Okay? It's pretty cool the way they made this work. So you can build one storyboard. It'll work fine on both platforms. So here we go. This is iPad. We can turn it around. Here it is. It is in a navigation controller, you see, which is actually kind of nice because I could put a nice title in here for this MVC. Okay? But when I click in here, it's not going to slide a deck onto the deck of cards. It's going to do the show detail, right? Angry, happy, worried, mischievous. Okay? Everyone got that? How we do that? Now, this kind of structure where we have split view, navigation controller, and then the content for your master, and then the detail out here, very common to build this. Because if you're building an app that works on both, this is what it's going to look like, basically. All right, so I'm going to show you one last thing here of interest, which is these titles. Okay, so we have this little space for a title up here. So I'd like to put a title here. Okay, and how do I put a title up here? Again, remember that's object-oriented. Okay, that title comes from whatever MVC happens to be showing in this navigation controller at the time. So I go to the storyboard, to that MVC, which is this one, and I can just double-click on it. Okay, and so we'll call this one Emotions. Okay, so now if I run, I get a nice title up here, Emotions. What if I wanted a title over here? Okay, how would I do it if I wanted a title over here? Well, if you look on the iPhone, okay, if we go back and run this on iPhone, since both MVCs are in that navigation controller, they both have titles. Okay, so if I go here, here's Emotions, Angry. Look, there's room for a title up here. Okay, but back on the iPad, that's not the case. because the detail, okay, when you replace the detail, it doesn't actually put it inside the same navigation controller that the master is in. So the master is in a navigation controller, but this is not. So if we wanted a title here, we have to put this guy in a navigation controller. Even though we're not going to use the navigation controller for anything except for the title on the split view case, we would still have to do it. And in fact, iOS makes it so that just works. Okay? So I'm going to go here down to this guy, okay, and I'm going to embed him in a navigation controller. Okay? Just have this, I got the face selected, embed, puts him in there, okay? Now, this almost is going to work, okay, if we look at what this looks like, okay? There's a little bit of an issue here because these segues are now going to this navigation controller, but let's take a look at what it looks like anyway. Okay, on iPad, look, they're both in navigation controller, so I have room for a title here now, okay? And if I click, it doesn't work anymore. Okay, so I broke it by putting this in a navigation controller. Now why, oh, and by the way, does it work on iPhone? Yes, still works on iPhone. So it did not break it on iPhone because iOS is smart enough to know this is already in a navigation controller, so I'm just going to ignore this navigation controller and put this in here. See, so this looks the same, no change, still in a navigation controller. iOS didn't put a navigation controller inside a navigation controller. In fact, iOS never puts a navigation controller inside another one. Okay, if it sees and encounters another one, it just ignores that one. Okay, it's like you're either in one or not. You can't be in two at the same time. So it worked great on the iPhone. So why did it break though? Sorry, it worked great visually, but it still, I didn't show it there, but it didn't work to click. Okay, just like on the iPad, it didn't work to click. And why didn't it work to click? Well, we have to understand our prepare a little bit better there. Okay, and in fact, let's take the time to do this. I'm going to go in the debugger and show you this. So I'm going to set a breakpoint right here, okay, in prepare for segue, because prepare for segue is not properly preparing that thing. So let's see why it's failing. All right, so here we go. I'm going to hit happy, and it's going to break, okay, at this prepare. So it's trying to prepare that thing to be happy. And what is, let's look at this destination VC right here. Look what its type is. It's a UI navigation controller. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because if you look at our storyboard, these segues are going down to this navigation controller. Okay? So that's just a little bit of a twist, a little bit tricky. And all we have to do is look at this destination VC, and if it's a navigation controller, then let's get the thing inside of it. Okay? And work on that. Okay? So I'm just going to say here, if I can let navcon, which is just a local variable, equal the destination VC as a UI navigation controller. So if the destination happens to be a UI navigation controller, then I'm going to let, I'm just going to set the destination VC equal to the navcon's visible view controller, which is optional. So I'm going to, actually I won't even unwrap it. I'm going to say, it's visible view controller, and if the navigation controller doesn't have a visible view controller, then we'll just leave it to be the destination view controller. This will have to be var. Okay? So here all I'm doing is I'm just saying if I'm preparing to segue to something and it's a navigation controller, then instead look inside the navigation controller and segue to that instead. Okay, prepare that instead. Okay? Everyone understand what I'm doing there with this little 3 lines of code?
To the face view controller instead of the navigation.
Yeah, so you're saying, could I go back here in the storyboard and have all these segue things go down over this way instead? You wouldn't actually want that because when the segue creates the MVC that it's going to show, you want it to create a navigation controller. So you actually want it going to this navigation controller. It's just that when it comes to preparing it, you don't really want to prepare the navigation controller, you want to prepare the thing inside. So that's why we're in this code just looking inside the navigation controller to make the destination that we're preparing be the thing inside. Okay? So a little trickiness. You'll often have this little code. I'll actually show you later in the quarter kind of a little more sophisticated way to put this in there. You can put it in there with one syntactical element. It's possible. But this I want to leave it explicit so you understand what's going on here. So now when we run, this is going to work because when we segue to something that's the navigation control, it's going to look inside. See, angry, happy, worried, mischievous. And the last thing I want to do is set this title right here. Now, this title was fixed. This is always the emotions MVC. But this MVC, its title kind of depends on what it's showing here, doesn't it? Right? Like if we're showing angry, it'd be nice if this title were angry. It'd be nice if this title were worried. Okay? So where can we get the appropriate title here? Well, we can get it from the button that's asking us to segue. Right? If this angry button asks us to segue, then let's set this title to be the title of the angry button, right? So looking back here in our prepare for segue, is that title of the angry button available to us here? Where? Where can I get it? From sender, yeah, exactly. Okay, you guys are getting it. That's really good. Sender is the button that's causing the segue to happen. That's going to be the angry button. So it's any object, so I'm going to have to cast it to be a button, but that's no problem. I'm just going to say if I can let the sending button equal the sender as a UI button, okay? And if not, if I'm segueing from code or something here, then this is not going to work, but so what? Okay, we just won't get the title we want on our face view controller. But if it is, then I can just set the face view controller's navigation item. Does everyone remember what navigation item is? It's kind of just a bundle of things, like a little bag of goodies that the navigation controller looks inside of when that MVC is showing to get information like the buttons or the title, okay, equals the sending button's current title. Okay? So this little bag of goodies, navigation item, here, let's look at it in the documentation. Okay, I'm going to go here to UI view controller. Let's look at navigation item. You can see it has things like the title to show when this MVC is showing in the navigation controller, back bar button item to use instead of the default one, left bar button items and right bar button items. You can put things on the top, left and right. That's what's in this little bag of goodies. And this bag of goodies is only looked in when you are on the top of a navigation controller stack. Okay? All right, so let's see if that works. All right, here we go. Let's try angry. There it is, angry, happy, worried, mischievous. Okay, and let's make sure that it's working on iPhone. All right, let's go back here. Angry, yes, look, it even got the title right. Happy, that's definitely happy. Worried. Okay. All right, everyone got that? So this is how we can build these nice apps that work on both platforms. Okay? They work in split views, they work in navigation controllers. Now, if you were building an iPhone-only app, you could do this exact same thing, but you wouldn't need this split view controller. You just take this, you would move your your little starting arrow right here. You could just move it right up here to this navigation controller, and you wouldn't need this navigation controller either. Okay? Because you don't have this issue where this whole thing is in a separate space like it is on iPad. On iPhone, they'd all be inside the navigation controller. Okay? Now, not surprisingly for your homework, I'm going to ask you to do pretty much exactly this. Okay? You're going to have the calculator, you're going to have a calculator graph, which you're going to have to write the code for. So you're going to have two MVCs, and you're going to have to put it in a situation like this that works on both iPad and iPhone. Okay? And now you know how to do it. All right, back to the slides. Okay, the view controller lifecycle. So I've been mentioning this, and we delete those methods in there for the view controller lifecycle. So now let's talk about what this view controller lifecycle is. Okay, so the view controller lifecycle is really just a set of methods that get sent to your view controller as your view controller goes through its lifetime. Okay, meaning its lifetime is it gets created, it does things, it dies. Okay, and as it goes through that life, you get sent these nice messages. Okay. So the start of the life cycle is obviously the creation of your MVC. And MVCs are almost always created out of storyboards. I'd say 99% of the time. Okay, that's how you've seen us do it, and that's how it's done. Okay, it can be done in code, but I'm not even going to show you how to do that in this course. It's very rarely done. Okay, the great thing about putting in a storyboard is that people looking at your code can see what you intend visually, okay, in terms of your MVC and their layout and their segues to each other. So that's why we try to do stuff in the storyboard. So 99% of the time, these MVCs are being created out of the storyboard. After they're created, they go through the following steps. One, they get prepared. Okay, they get segued to, they get prepared. So that happens first. Then outlet setting happens. That's why we had that crasher, because outlet setting happens after prepared. Then they appear and disappear. Okay. Now, this can happen over and over. Okay, this thing can appear on screen, go away, appear on screen, go away. For example, when we had the iPad version of our demo here, and I would pull out the master, and then I would hide it. And I'd pull out the master, and then I would hide it. Okay, it was appearing and disappearing. All right. Then, as this is all happening, geometry changes can happen to this thing, mostly due to rotation, right? From portrait to landscape, changes the geometry. And then, very rarely, you can get into a low memory situation where your view controller might be asked to participate in freeing up some memory. Okay, super rare. All right, so let's talk about all these methods. Okay, after instantiation and preparation and outlet setting, you get a very important method sent to you, called viewDidLoad. Okay, load refers to loading up your outlets, okay? So viewDidLoad is an awesome place to put initialization code in UI View Controller. It's why you almost never have to override View Controller's init method. Okay, it has a very strange init method. You don't even want to think about it, it's so weird, okay? But luckily you never need to override it because you got viewDidLoad, okay? And you can put all your initialization code, almost all, into viewDidLoad, okay? It's kind of like your init for view controllers. It's awesome. And it's great there because you're prepared and your outlets are set. So it's like, whoa, you are ready to really get initialized, okay? And of course, all your instance variables are initialized or you wouldn't exist, okay? One really good thing to do here is to update your UI. So you notice we had update UI in the outlet setter property observer for face view, okay? More likely, you'd put update UI in your viewDidLoad, okay? Because you know by viewDidLoad, everything is ready to be updated. Okay, now you're still going to want it in your models did set because someone might change your model after you've been loaded. Okay, but no one's going to change your outlets after you've been loaded. Your outlets get set up and now you own them. Okay, so no one's going to set it to point to something else. Okay. Now, one thing to be careful about in viewDidLoad though is geometry. Okay, the geometry of your view is still probably the square. Okay, of your storyboard. So it's useless to do any calculations in viewDidLoad that have anything to do with your geometry. If you're looking at your bounds and trying to make a calculation, it's a waste of time because it's a square. It hasn't been updated to the portrait or landscape of the device you're running on. Okay, so this is the one thing you don't do in viewDidLoad. The other thing I wouldn't do in viewDidLoad is anything that's going to kick off something expensive. Okay, computing expensive or network intensive, whatever, there's a better place to do that. That's because viewDidLoad, okay, your view controller got created, it's not a 100% guarantee it's going to appear on screen. It might or might not, depends on what the user touches in your UI. So you wouldn't want to kick off something expensive until you know you're going to be on screen. And that brings us to view will appear. Okay, so view will appear is called right before you get put on screen. So you are sure when this is called that you're going to be put on screen. This is a great place to start something expensive. Now, you're going to learn starting next week that iOS apps, you want to build them multi-threaded. Okay? Okay, multi-threaded means you're going to have multiple things going on at the same time in your app. They'll be sharing the processor, time sharing this processor basically, unless you have multi-core, I guess, which I guess the iPhones all do. So you're basically running multiple things at the same time. Your UI is going to be running in one thread at a very high priority. And then other things like accessing the network or things that block, things that take a long time, are going to be running in other threads. They're going to be running simultaneously because we never want our UI to be blocked. Okay, when the user touches on something, it should immediately respond. I don't care what you're doing. Okay, you don't want to touch on something and it does nothing because you're out trying to fetch something from the network and the network is slow. That would be a nightmare, okay? So view will appear is where you would fire off another thread to go do something expensive. Okay, now your view is going to instantly appear on screen without that data that you tried to get or whatever the expensive thing is. So you have to learn to program in iOS so that multi-threading works. And mostly that's a matter of putting UIs on the screen that might not have all the information yet. Okay? They might be fetching some data from the network. So they have to have a little spinning wheel or something, loading, ... something that tells the user, yeah, I know you want to see this data, I'm working on it, but it has to come on screen instantly. Okay? You can't block, wait till you get your one, and then come on. You can't do that. It just doesn't work. Especially iOS, like the network can be really slow. It might be cell, right? Cell network can be super slow, so you can't do that. So view will appear is a good place to kick off that kind of stuff. Now, geometry is more likely to be correct here because you're just about to come on screen, but I still wouldn't put geometry calculations in here. There's a better place for that as well. There's also a view did appear. This gets sent right after you have come on screen. This is a good place to do things like start an animation. Okay, because now you know you're on screen, boom, you can start an animation or something like that. Okay, similarly, there's view will disappear. Okay, usually view will disappear. You're going to undo the things you did in view did appear. So here you might stop your animation, okay, or stop looking at the gyro, okay, because your thing is going to disappear, so there's no use looking at the gyro anymore, okay? And there's also a view did disappear. Okay, this is where you might free up something you fetched from the network in view will appear. See how they kind of are mirrors each other? The will and did appear, and then the will and did disappear. Kind of you do and undo things as it goes on and off. And these appear and disappear could be, view did load is only called once. Okay, one time. This could be called repeatedly as your view controller comes on and off screen. Appears, it disappears, appears, it disappears. So this could be called repeatedly. Okay, so you wouldn't want to do something in here, like if you're going to fire off a fetch on the network that's expensive, you wouldn't want to be doing it over and over if you already have the information from the last time it appeared. Okay, so be a little careful about that. So if you want to do something based on geometry, where do you do that? Well, there's lifecycle methods specifically for that. View will layout subviews and view did layout subviews. So every time your bounds changes, and sometimes when it doesn't change, be careful, you'll get these two messages, view will layout subview and view did layout subviews. Yeah? Great question. So the question is, would my bounds change if, for example, I added a navigation bar at the top, or maybe the tab bar, I appeared in a tab bar, or I'm in the split view, and now I appeared on the side? In other words, can it change due to the environment I'm in? And the answer is it can. Now, it doesn't usually change with the navigation case because actually that navigation bar is layered on top of your view. It's kind of semi-see-through. If you go look at navigation items in navigation bars, they're actually kind of translucent and the thing is behind it. So your bounds actually wouldn't probably change there. But they might change if you're put into a tab bar because that space at the bottom might not overlap. Okay? But the main time your bounds change is when you rotate, but it can happen other times too. So between view will layout subviews and view did layout subviews, all that auto layout is going to happen. The stuff based on the constraints. Remember all that blue dashed lines and all that stuff? That's going to happen between. So you can do stuff before all the blue lines, auto layout stuff is happening, or you can do it after. Okay? You rarely need to do anything here because usually the constraints are making all the decisions about what to do with everything. Okay? But it is possible sometimes, not in assignment 3, maybe in assignment 6 in this class, maybe you might want to do something in view, will, or did layout subviews. But this is the only place you want to do anything that's geometry dependent. Okay? Yeah, the one thing about these methods, don't think that these are only going to be called when your bounds actually changes. The system is allowed to call these anytime it wants. And sometimes it might be drawing something to an off-screen buffer to prepare to do an animation, and so it calls this. Okay? But, and then it actually draws it on screen and calls it again, and the bounds have not actually changed. Okay? So don't expect that every single time this call, the bounds will be different. If you do something really expensive as a result of a bounds change, you might want to keep track of what the bounds were the last time you did that expensive thing. And when this gets called, make sure the bounds have actually changed. Okay? Again, you're not going to need any of this for assignment 3, but it's good to know this can be called all the time, repeatedly, over and over, even if your bounds have not actually changed. Okay, so auto rotation, usually what happens in auto rotation, right? Auto rotation is when you turn your phone from landscape to portrait and it automatically changes your bounds to be tall and skinny, and then wide and short, okay? So auto rotation is usually just a bounds change, so you're just dealing with it in view, did, layout, subviews, or more likely, you just have constraints, and the constraints just work, okay? So there's really nothing to do. But it is possible to get involved in auto rotation, specifically in the animation. If you watch an auto rotation really, really closely, you'll see that the views actually move. They move from their position in portrait to where they are in landscape in an animated fashion. They don't just jump there. They kind of fly across the screen. And you can fly things across the screen too if you want, using this life cycle method called view will transition to size. And it's basically telling you this is going to transition. It has this thing called a transition coordinator. You can look up the documentation on it. But the main thing the transition coordinator has is a closure that you can provide that will be executed alongside the animation that it's doing to animate your rotation. Okay? You won't need this in this class, but I just want to let you know this is here. Okay. In low memory situation, did receive memory warning. Okay, this is only going to happen if your app uses a lot of memory. Okay, iPhones today have so much memory, it's ridiculous. Okay, so this is not really going to happen likely. But if you had a memory leak where you're leaking videos in memory or images, huge images or something like that, it's possible you might get this. When you get this, you should throw out any pointers to big things you have in the heap that you can recreate. Okay? So you can re-download them from the web or from your file system or something. You should throw them out when you get this one. Okay, going back to the very beginning of the life cycle, there's another interesting method called awake from nib. Okay? Awake from nib is sent to you really early, before preparation, before outlet setting, before all that, but only if you're coming out of a storyboard. Okay? So it's this really, 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 really early method that gets called, and it actually gets sent to every object that comes out of a storyboard, not just view controllers. Okay? Now, I mention at the end here because I really don't want you using it that much. Okay? You're much better off putting things in view did load, view will appear, those kind of places, than awake from nib. Okay? Some people find out about this and they just put all their initialization junk into awake from nib, and it's not really for that. It's for really kind of exceptional circumstances where you really, really early you need to do something for some reason. Okay? You need to set yourself as a controller of some other object that something's happening early, whatever. But I just want to let you know it's in there. Okay, so here's the summary of the life cycle. You're instantiated, usually from your storyboard. Awake from nib is then called. Segue prep happens if you're being segued to, which you almost always are when MVCs are being created. It's because you're being segued to, usually. Then your outlets get set. Okay, just things like display in the calculator get set. Then view did load gets called, and you can do a lot of nice initialization here that's not geometry related. Then view will appear and did appear, and then view will disappear and view did disappear will be sent to you as you appear and disappear on screen. Meanwhile, at any time, whether you're on screen or not, whether you've appeared or not, you can be sent view will layout subviews and view did layout subviews. Okay, and that's where you're going to react to geometry changes if you need to outside of constraints. Okay, usually constraints will just do it for you. And if your memory gets low at any time, you could get did receive memory warning. If you get did receive memory warning and you don't clean up your memory, the system will probably kill you. Okay, just probably your app will appear to crash to the user. Okay, so I have a short demo here for view controller lifecycle, and I'm just going to throw some print statements into all those lifecycle methods. Okay, that's all I'm going to do, and then we're going to run our FaceIt. And we're going to see, as view controllers appear and disappear and get created, what's happening in the life cycle, okay? So that's all this demo is. It's very brief, okay? The way that I'm going to kind of print in the console is I have this a little extension here called VCL, View Controller Lifecycle, that I'm just going to add to FaceIt, copy it in, and I will post this so you can look at it if you want, but it's just extending these classes to override all of these things. And one thing that's cool is it'll show you the log, which instance of the face view controller, which instance of the motion controller. Okay, so that's kind of fun. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Let's do it on iPhone first. All right, so this thing appeared, all right, and it's showing the face, okay? This is kind of like on an iPad, it would be showing the detail here. It's showing a face, but we haven't chosen emotion. And let's look over here what happened. Both an emotions view controller and a face view controller have been created and instantiated. Okay? Now, that's because the emotions view controller is at the bottom of the stack, and a face view controller is on top of it. So they're both on the stack. That means they both exist. However, notice that while the emotions one has had view did load call because its outlets have all been set and all that stuff, it has never appeared. You see, emotions one never gets view will appear because it never has appeared. We've never seen the angry, mischievous. That has not appeared on screen, so it hasn't appeared. Whereas the face one has. So it's gotten view will appear. It got it laid out. Okay, view will lay out subviews and did lay out subviews. And then it got view did appear, and sure enough, here it is. Now I'm going to press back, the back button, and let's watch what happens. Okay, face one got view will disappear because, of course, it was going to disappear. Emotions one, that's this one, got view will appear because it's about to appear. Then emotions one got laid out a couple of times here. So you can see some more here. There we go. Okay, so emotions one got laid out a couple of times here. See, view will lay out subviews, view will lay out, and at the same exact size. So this is why I'm saying be careful. That can happen multiple times. Why might that happen? Again, maybe the system was preparing to animate that thing sliding in, and so it was drawing off screen, then it was drawing on screen, and it was laying out both times. It's called it both times. You don't know why, you don't care why. You just have to be prepared for the fact that it could call it multiple times. Then face one got view did disappear because the face disappeared, it slid off, and emotions one got view did appear because it got replaced on top of it. Then notice emotions one got laid out again, okay, even though it was already on screen. Why? I don't know. Maybe this is the layout for it actually appearing on screen. It's not clear. Okay, everybody got that? Now I'm going to click on one of these. I'm going to click on happy, and let's watch what happens. Okay, now the most important thing to watch here, okay, is that face one, that first face that we showed up, is gone. See, no more reference to face one. It has created a new face, came out of the storyboard. Okay, this is what I was talking about. When you segue, it creates a new MVC. That first face one is out of the heap. It is gone. Okay, every time you segue, you get a new one. But emotions, okay, the root, it's still emotions one. Okay, since it sits on the root, the base of the card stack, it never comes off, so it just sits there forever. Okay, new cards come on and off, but it's at the root, so it just sits there. So it's always going to be emotions one. Okay, and then again, you can see it goes through did load, view will appear, got laid out, face two finally did appear. Okay, and notice that emotions one did disappear because it got covered up by this one. Okay, again, if we go back and I click a different one like mischievous, now we have face three. Okay, face two is gone forever, but still emotions one. Everyone understand that? Okay, now let's run this on the iPad. Okay, so here, okay, we're seeing the detail, okay? Notice here that even though the master does not appear on screen, it gets created. Not only does it get created, it gets laid out, but it never got view will appear and view did appear because the master has never appeared. Okay? Whereas face one, it did get appear, and it appeared, right? Now, watch what happens if I rotate. Okay, I'm going to rotate to landscape. Okay, now when I rotate to landscape, all of a sudden the master, emotions one, it got that view will transition to size thing. That's the auto rotation thing I was telling you about. Okay? And emotions one also got laid out and told it would appear. And then it did appear. Okay? Now face one also got to participate in that rotation. See? Animate alongside transition. Okay? And then here's emotion one appear. Notice that inside here, okay, there's no view will appear or view will disappear for face one. That's because it was already on screen. Okay? So even though its bounds changed, okay, and it got view will layout subviews, it never got view will appear. It already was on screen. Does that make sense? And now, interesting, I'm going to click on one of these. And what's going to happen to face one? Out of the heap. Okay, watch this. Angry. See, face one, gone. Now we're on face two. So even in a split view where it seems like, you know, with the cards, it's really obvious that, oh yeah, I'm throwing the card away, I'm making a new card. But even here in a split view, I'm throwing away the detail and making a new one. plopping it right in on top, okay? So all these segues create a new MVC, even if they're split view, navigation controller, whatever. The only ones that don't, that you've seen, is in tab bar. All those things in the tab bar, it's too bad I don't really have a tab bar one to show you this VCL thing, but those ones get created when you click on the tab for the first time, and they live forever. Okay? They never go away. And when you click on the tab, it comes back, it's still exactly the same one. It's not a segue. In other words, the tab bar is not segueing. Navigation control and split view are segueing. Tab bar, notice we never did anything there to do a segue. Okay? Yeah, notice here also that even though when I clicked on here to show this, look what happened to Emotions 1. It got laid out a couple times. Even though its size did not change. Here, I'll do it again. We'll go to Happy. Okay? I didn't change, this did not change size in the least. Okay? And yet it got view will layout subviews, view did layout subviews. We'll see. Okay? So you have to be prepared for that being called all the time. Okay? And so here's phase 3. It's getting pulled out of the storyboard. It's kind of interesting that it gets a view will disappear here. I've noticed this. I'm not sure why it gets that right there. It's kind of strange. And then it loads. It gets a will appear. It lays out. It gets did disappear and then did appear. So this is strange. I don't really understand why it goes through that shenanigan right there. But the good news is that once view did appear happens, it has appeared. So that's good. It's just kind of strange. So be prepared for that. Now, you'll have this code of mine, this little logging thing. So you can always throw this in your own app, okay, change the names of the classes. And then you can see if something's not going the way you expect and the lifecycle method's not getting called at the time you want, you can see it when it's happening exactly. Okay? All right, that is it for today. Your assignment is posted. Already explained what it's going to be. It's due next Wednesday before class. Hopefully you're finished up all of the reading for the Swift thing. All that Swift reading, you're really going to want to have that in your memory bank as the rest of the quarter happens. So if you're a little behind there, make sure you catch up as soon as possible. All right, I'll be here if you have questions.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.